I think here's the clicker. Here's the clicker.
Perfect.
Relax.
More casual and
Okay, let's get started. So hear what your presentation is. Welcome everybody online and everybody here. This is our last brown bag for this semester. We'll start some more next semester, but I'm glad you're here. Today we have Dr. Gale Ramirez, Dr. Karen Terry, and Dr. Radcliffe talking about LGBTQ plus issues in education. So would you like to jump in?
Sure. Thank y'all for coming. And my colleagues were letting me drag them along all the time. So I'm like, I don't want to do things by myself, so they'll always do it with me. So our study is LGBT issues in education. We've changed titles a million times, probably every presentation that we've done. It's kind of changed a little bit. It's such a broad issue, but we're a little more specific in our research. There are several of us.
I think it's the arrow.
This one, I can't see that far. So. Okay, so there are several of us. Dr. Terry did lead this first phase of our research. Dr. Barbie Radcliffe, myself, Dr. J.T. Cox, Dr. Debbie Payne, and Dr. A.J. Ramirez. So it was quite a collaboration between us. So our problem or our challenge, I know it's kind of off, that we found, obviously we have a significant shortage in our P-12 education with our teachers. There's always holes, gaps, schools calling us, asking, please send us more people. So we already have this shortage, but we have a lack of diversification and inclusion when it comes to the LGBTQ community and teachers and how they are, dealing with things in their heteronormative community or staying behind the closet most of the time. And really overcoming the obstacles that we have that includes lack of awareness that we've found as we're putting teacher candidates through programs, just in lack of awareness of teacher candidates that identify in this community and personal biases that we have, not just with mentor teachers or, it goes beyond that. When you talk administration and then superintendents and then, it's a bigger story. So this is you, Dr. Terry.
All right, so to talk a little bit more specifically about the nature of our study, it was purely qualitative and an ethnographic single case study. So we had one student that participated in the study. Our data primarily consisted of the interview that was conducted, a single shot interview by researchers that Dr. Ramirez talked about, two of us, interviewed a transgender pre-service teacher following their program completion. So this particular student finished their program, and then we conducted the research at the culmination of after graduation. The additional information you'll find in the study that we talk about came from the experiences of the teacher educators and any P-12 personnel who were involved with the student during their program of study and throughout their field experiences. All right, so let's talk about the theoretical framework and how we sort of formatted the research. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a qualitative study. It's what we would consider an ethnographic single case because it's one student. And we used an intersectional constructivism approach that included queer theory and feminist theory. And as you get to know our subject a little bit more, Dr. Ramirez is going to talk about that. That'll make a little bit more sense. We would say that the theoretical underpinning that guided us through this research and mostly the lit review was really the basis of Anfara's and Mertz's work and their contention that exploring and reporting someone's personal life experiences and their perception of society was the appropriate theory for us to follow for this study. And of course, the constructivist theory posits that a human being's, the way they construct knowledge and meaning is directly from their life experience. So that's what guided the research and how we moved forward working with this particular graduate.
Okay, so the research was with Clover. Clover identifies as transgender, and they are a teaching candidate that, like Dr. Terry said, was a graduate. Their preferred pronouns are they, them, theirs, so that's what you'll hear us use throughout our presentation. They are white, 26 years old. They are born biologically female, non-binary. They were developing masculine features, but retained some feminine features, especially in their name and their voice. They were a pre-service teaching candidate in the MAT program and graduated with honors and a GPA of 3.9. They were issued a standard induction teaching certificate for the state of Georgia and applied for several teaching positions in the English language arts classes. And at the time of our study, remained unemployed, but we'll talk a little bit about that story as we go along.
Okay, so to really understand the realities that Clover faced, it's important to understand the structure of the program. So Clover was in our MAT program, and so they have 3 semesters of field work placement, between field placement, apprenticeship, and then also their student teaching. And so MAT years start in the summer, and so Clover took their first 3 classes and did swimmingly well, 4.0. In the fall 2020, summer classes were all on campus, face-to-face, traditional classroom. In fall 2020 is when early field experience starts, but what was going on in fall 2020? COVID. So none of our students went out into the field for fall 2020. So that beginning field experience, no student actually got to participate in that. But when spring 2021 rolled around, the schools have started opening their doors and allowing our students back in. So Clover was taking the apprenticeship class, which included 1 day a week in a high school. And then towards the very, I guess it's towards the middle for spring semester, they do 4 weeks full-time, it's like a mini student teaching experience. And so it was in the first apprenticeship experience that they were placed in their hometown, and they also substituted in that hometown. So they had a substitution certificate when they weren't actually in class or doing their 1 day a week at that point. They subbed for the school system. But at some point, the school contacted us and terminated. They said that they had terminated the eligibility for their substitute teaching, saying that they didn't follow the substitutes plans. And they also said that Clover was not welcome to return for the 4-week full-time experience. And the reason they gave was that the parents were concerned about having a student teacher. But yet the mentor teacher who was supervising Clover during those 1 day a week pieces said all was going really well. So basically halfway through that semester, right up to that 4-week period, all of a sudden Clover found themselves without a placement. So the university found another rural district for Clover to do the 4-week experience. And they were highly successful in that experience. And typically where our students do their apprenticeship is where they remain for their student teaching. So they've learned the way of the school and the expectations, and it makes for a smoother transition. So despite Clover doing really, really well, during that apprenticeship experience, the assistant principal let the university supervisor know that Clover couldn't return because, well, they decided they weren't going to have any VSU students for fall 2021, which is the way to get out of having to take somebody, because if you accept nobody, you're not discriminating.
Can I ask a quick question? So was there a particular reason why the placements were rural?
Because that's where we are.
That's
We're
just,
in rural.
oh, so they consider even here, I didn't know if it,
Yeah.
I didn't know if that meant.
They are a little further out. These are a little further out.
Okay, so that's what, I just wondered if that
And
was,
also closer for the student.
gotcha,
Because
okay.
when we know, as Dr. Radcliffe talked about, when we know that the progression is that they stay in the same place, for this student, not having to drive an hour each way
Gotcha.
to
Gotcha.
stay
Yeah.
closer. And also the student and their family had connection, the student had been substitute teaching, was familiar, had up until this point been successful. So that kind of all plays a part in
Gotcha.
the placement, if that makes sense.
Well, the goal is to also allow them to be where they might get a job right afterwards. And so this was Clover's hometown, the
Okay,
original one.
okay,
And
gotcha.
then the next one was just a little bit further, close to us, but not in our area.
Okay.
And so then we did complete apprenticeship.
Sorry.
And so now we moved to student teaching. So, again, a placement has to be found for Clover because they're not allowed back at this school. So another placement was placed. It was closer to us now, and basically in our backyard. And Clover met face to face with the mentor teacher during pre-planning. And then 2 days after meeting with the teacher during pre-planning, the director of personnel contacted the university, and they shared that Clover had violated the social media policy. But they gave no examples. They didn't share policy, no explanations or anything. And their placement was canceled again. And there were professors who combed the social media. You want to share anything?
Yeah, the only thing that we could find and that Clover talked with us about is on their LinkedIn account, they had added their pronoun preference of they, them. That was the only thing that, as we looked through and talked to the candidate, but again, that would not have been in violation of any type of policy. It was the only change that we could think of or that we saw.
And pushing for an example, we didn't get examples so that we could help inform all of our candidates to make sure that they aren't making, that mistake in the future as well. But we got no details as to what the true issue was. So we had to find another student placement. So this is number 2. And so the university reached out unofficially to a local high school teacher here who was considered LGBTQ plus supportive. And that teacher agreed without hesitation to open her classroom to Clover and mentor them. But that school district's policy is that the district approves placements, not the teacher. And so the EPP contacted the district superintendent, and in that meeting, they shared some background knowledge of the situation. And ultimately, the superintendent decided not to approve the placement. And for this one, they cited that there were still issues with COVID-19 protocol, and they needed to avoid any other possible distractions or issues that semester. So again, we're now in student teaching, and Clover still does not have a placement. And then around September, Clover contacted a professor and said, I have great concerns. Am I going to be able to graduate? And so then for a third attempt of student placement, the EPP contacted a state virtual charter school. And that school agreed to accept Clover. So we created an MOU with the school, and the following week, Clover started in a 9th grade English class. They completed face-to-face training. They were introduced with their preferred pronoun. They had the honorific of mix, and Clover successfully completed student teaching, graduated with honors, and receive an induction certificate.
So that kind of, kind of brings us through the steps of the placements and the experience throughout the program. But we also want to share some of Clover's perspectives that also came out in the interview, and to really hear their voice. So Dr. AJ Ramirez and I conducted the interview, and these were some of the points we definitely wanted to share out of the research. The first one is that, like any program, we encourage our candidates to, discover where do they think they want to teach, to start applying for positions early. Don't wait until graduation. They're, as Dr. Radcliffe talked about and Dr. Ramirez, they're making contacts as they're going out into the field and having these experiences. Where do you think you fit? Look for job postings, network. And so that's part of the interview that we talked about and wanted to learn more about Clover's experiences. So in the job interviews that Clover was going on, they noted the surprise and discomfort when they walked into the interview, whether that be online, on camera, through Teams or Zoom, or face-to-face, that a lot of times the interviewers were visibly uncomfortable and wouldn't make eye contact. And in one case, Clover talked about the interviewers spending a lot of time talking about the honorific of MX, asking how to pronounce it, asking what it meant. Even after that, lots of follow-up questions when there was a lack of questions about their experience, their qualifications. The questions seem to always be in other areas, such as the honorific. Clover also noted that the interviewers took notes when they would answer a question, not asking follow-up questions, again, not making eye contact. And after a few of these experiences, Clover shared with us that they felt that it didn't take long after a while to know that the interviewer, the process, they were going through the motions, that there was probably no intent for any follow-up. There was no eye contact, no further discussion, and interviews ended usually very abruptly, very, very quickly. And then finally, no job offers were ever made, even though some of the openings that Clover had applied for remained open for several weeks, and in some cases, months, that the positions were not filled, that those classrooms were essentially operating without a certified and qualified educator. And those were some of the things that just to hear the experience of going through that. And it didn't take long for Clover to realize pretty quickly at the start of an interview that it wasn't really going to go anywhere.
So our goal in this is really to make some of this come to light. So much of these conversations, especially in the education field, just go unnoticed. We want to leave it as the elephant in the room that nobody talks about if it's there and someone does know about it. But some of the implications for further research, we would love to see some training for educators in the field, for teachers, for administrators, for central office administration, and so that it's less of a touchy situation where people feel so awkward about talking about it or are welcoming teacher candidates into their buildings. Even creating support networks for these teacher candidates that identify with the LGBTQ plus community, discussing how to remove these barriers. This was nothing that was expected. For us, we were just putting another candidate through. It was a little blindsiding, I think, for the faculty that had to deal with this. And do you have it in the back of your mind sometimes that something like this may come up? Of course, sure. but definitely more research to figure out how do we get beyond this for our teacher candidates. Some of the legal implications, Dr. Radcliffe touched on policies and how we didn't really find these policies in place, and really some of the legal implications there of how do we get beyond this? How do we make sure that our teacher candidates, but also our teachers and ultimately the students that they serve are protected too. And then obviously the cultural implications. We could go on for hours and hours just about the things that our students, that our teacher candidates serve in the field, that normalizing some of this, having these conversations. But now in the midst of this study, and you having the Don't Say Gay bill, so much has changed just in the course of our study together, that it just, every time we blink, it seems to broaden and broaden and broaden, and there's so much more that can be done for this topic. Whoa, I'm going to read that to you because you cannot read that. So our future research, we are going to look at and are in the process of another study with another LGBTQ plus identifying teacher candidate. And we just want to hear more experiences. We think the more that we talk about this, the more that it's conversation, the more that we normalize all of our teacher candidate experiences, the less awkward people will feel, and hopefully ultimately the administration that our teacher candidates serve under. And eventually we want to broaden our research to local in-service teachers as well, to include in our study, because many are also closeted, and these are conversations that don't come up because there's so much fear. And especially now, like I said, the Don't Say Gay bill happened in the midst of this study, so now there's just so much more to talk about. So definitely lots of future research that can come from this study. And that's it. If we have any questions, that's where we're at.
Well,
We wrapped that up fast.
I know. You guys are-
We come in chatty and we just,
that was it.
That was wonderful information, and I think very valuable. Honestly, it's always hard to think that this is still going on, that we're still here after all these years.
Sure.
But how is Clover doing now?
Yes,
There.
yes, and so we are very happy to report that the virtual school did hire Clover. So Clover is in their very first year, and we're continuing to follow up. And one of the things we did as a PPP, and we do this for all of our candidates, but it was important, very important, we did very specific follow-up about making sure that they were gaining membership to professional organizations that included legal counseling should they need it, and just making sure, and we tell this to all of our candidates, and I'm sure every program does, but keeping up with your evaluations, making sure that you're documenting that, along the way, so that it's not that you get to the end of, in this case, the end of the school year to say, we are a right to work state. And so for a virtual charter school to be able to say, we're not going to renew your contract, not that that would happen, but again, counseling the student even after they left the program as a completer to say, these are what your options are, these are the things, these are best practices that you should do, really for anyone to do, to keep up with your evaluations, your own documentation, and those kinds of things. So far so good. And in that case, there was one in the high school, in the virtual school, all the cameras are on. There was one parent that did voice a concern, and the option was that the student could be moved to another section of 9th grade Lit and Comp. And I guess some conversations happened around the kitchen table, and that student stayed and did very well. And so, yeah, so far, lots of good things happening. An excellent practitioner with undeniable content knowledge, and just Yes, everything's going really well so far.
Well, we certainly do need very good teachers for online.
Mhm.
But does Clover feel disappointed that they're having to go the online route rather than face-to-face?
I will say, I had direct knowledge during student teaching, and I would say that for any student, understanding, at first it was, I need this to graduate, and I'm just relieved to be able to do this. And then to see how a virtual charter school works, the relationships with their students, just really embraced it and had a wonderful experience. And a lot of times in a virtual setting, you get to know your students differently, but sometimes more quickly because they're so much more comfortable with their screen in front of them than they are sometimes face to face. So it was really enriching, eye-opening experience. The other thing we kind of ran into also that came out in the interview was, oh, should this candidate move to a metropolitan area? If this is what they want, should they move? And, but this candidate, like so many others, grew up in that community, immediate family, extended family, all right there, and really had no interest in moving to a metropolitan area. And we all know in the field of education, it's not like you're getting a great big signing bonus to go move to a metro area to live and all of those things. So there was a trade-off, wanting to stay home and close to home, and this fit the bill. So, but it's a great question and one that we'll follow up on. But to answer your question, at that point in time, the viability of teaching face-to-face and staying in their local community was not an option.
Yeah, it almost appears as shoving them back into the closet.
Yes, yes, and that's something we talked about as well. The difference in Dr. Ramirez really leads us in that understanding of transgender candidates don't have a choice when they walk into an interview or walk into a room, versus perhaps someone who's closeted, who may have a little bit more.
Can pass.
Can you speak
You can
that?
pass. You can pass. But because I've walked that walk. I was an elementary school teacher in the LGBTQ community, and I didn't have the family photos up, and I didn't, when all the other teachers were putting up, this is me and my family and my dog, and this is us hiking, and and they're doing the first of the year's things. Teachers that are closeted, who like myself can pass, they don't have to out themselves, and nor does anyone else. Not that it doesn't happen, but in some teacher experiences, if they're transgender, sometimes they don't pass like as easily as I would per se, but they do find things a little more difficult sometimes. I think we have a question online.
Yeah, Mike, did you intend to lower your hand? You still have a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you. I enjoyed the presentation. I don't have my camera on. I won't go into details. My hair is really messed up. Anyway, I had a question about the theory in one of the PowerPoints. You were talking about you intersected feminist theory and queer theory. Did you happen to look at anything in like postmodern feminism? I've done some research on that, and it seems like it might relate to your project. And thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. And the direct answer to your question is no, but we'd love to follow up with you. Oh, is there?
She wants to.
I can't see. Okay,
She
there.
will follow up.
I didn't see. Is AJ still on?
She is. She has her hand
She
raised.
does.
Okay.
Sorry.
Oh, there. Okay, now I can see.
There we go.
Okay,
Mike, I think the other Dr. Ramirez, who is connecting virtually, I think she can probably answer that.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
There she is.
Oh, there we can see.
Oh, and the kid in the background.
Oh,
Am I allowed to talk?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. Hey, Mike, postmodern feminism would, even postmodern theory would be absolutely great to implement in this. And I think in the second phase, we may bring or introduce some of that. Some of the stuff that I pulled in from queer and feminist theory was really a lot of the basics, because when we're dealing with this population of educators, they're coming in from a teacher ed program from most, universities that don't really implement a great deal of basic introduction feminist or queer theory. So we wanted this to be readable to the lay population so that, a first grade teacher, an 8th grade teacher could pick up this article and kind of say, wow, that's happening. That's not okay. Or, geez, I never thought about how my heteronormative privilege impacts that. But I think, if we push the research forward to a more in-depth, look at different cases, I think we could bring in that postmodern theory. But in my experience, unfortunately, postmodern is like people tend to go, huh?
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Why you didn't select that for that audience. So thank you for explaining that.
You're welcome. I have my
Yeah.
own question
Oh.
to the group, even though I'm a part of the research team. I want to kind of just throw this out there. Have you guys considered, maybe bringing in a phase or a section later on with talking to actual heterosexual or non-LGBTQ teachers or administrators and just kind of getting an understanding of what their thoughts are on this? I mean, just to kind of look at it from a flip side.
I would love for you to take that one.
Thank you, Dr. Ramirez, for your question. And I think we touched on some of the House bills, of course, in Florida, but also House Bill 1084 in Georgia, that we're also doing a lot of work with and a lot of research. And for those of you who may not be familiar with House Bill 1084, essentially in a nutshell, it talks about bringing up divisive topics in the P-12 classroom. And so yes, so we're also kind of looking at that avenue and that path of what does that mean for P-12 administrators? What does that mean for P-12 teachers? And also part of the bill talks about a parent, a guardian, or a student being able to file a complaint to say, hey, you broached this divisive topic that has made me uncomfortable, or you have pointed me out in a way that has made me uncomfortable, and now the schools are faced with they need to be able to provide a policy where a complaint can be made, and then a process can ensue for that complaint to be investigated. Also tied to that, depending on the outcome of the complaint, funding could be withheld from a school, possibly, if you're found in violation. A teacher could be terminated. If a certificate could be removed, which essentially then you couldn't teach in a public P-12 setting. So looking at those things and what is divisive. So the bill is vaguely worded. The bill in Florida that Dr. Ramirez talked about, a little more specific about grade levels and topics that, and we were able, Dr. Radcliffe and I were able to meet with a Florida administrator in our time at a conference in Florida, where it is true that, for example, elementary school teachers have to catalog their classroom libraries. That has to be approved now. That goes to the media specialist. What topics can or cannot be explored, and what teachers can and cannot talk about. And so yes, so the legal piece is raining down on us, and we need to be informed. And our and we look at it too, because our candidates now, as an EPP, we are also mentioned in House Bill 1084 that we have a requirement through the Georgia Professional Standards Commission to educate our future practitioners in what the bill means, and that we also have a responsibility to do that. Again, the wording is very vague, and we're waiting for direct instruction of how, as an EPP, we move forward with that. But these are all, very, very prominent issues, and they're happening right here in front of us, and in present day.
I wish schools would have
been able to stay on, but obviously he's having computer trouble. Because it seems to me that in many ways, we've already fought this fight legally, and there's great legal precedents to eventually undo these. So I imagine there's several lawyers just waiting for these to become law so they can attack them. Because I was even thinking that some of the old legal cases dealing with just people of color, but going back to when, because I'm that old, going back to when it was finally being allowed for interracial marriages and that being discussed in schools. There's some great legal precedents there that I think will hopefully overturn these.
And for us as the EVP, for teachers, you're always under the gun anyway, you know, GMAT scores and, you know, angry parents or whatever, but you can imagine the fear now that the educators have of saying, you know, saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing. And, you know, we have to be able to provide our candidates with confidence enough in what they're doing, and but also say, but don't be too confident in what you're doing, you know. So we have to find that fine line, you know, as the EVP too.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that moving down here particularly, but there was some up north too, where we have teachers, I've gone into classrooms who are constantly promoting the Christian thing.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of ironic that we're still allowing that. And again, a legal precedent, that's what I would attack at that point, that they would not be able to do that. And legally, they're not supposed to. But it seems like a perfect opportunity to get into some law work on that.
Yeah, and I think for me too, it's really given me great pause, and we've talked about this in that, you know, we work really hard to provide our students with quality instruction, quality experiences. And I was sharing with Dr. Radcliffe specifically in my social studies middle grades and secondary methods classes, where, you know, we're going through the content, we're going through the curriculum, and they're coming to me saying, you know, when I teach this part of history, what is divisive here? How, you know, and it gives us pause to think, how are we directing them correctly when the bill is so vague? You know, when you're teaching what students are saying, you know, these are factual pieces of history, but then couldn't they be questioned in how we're presenting them? And so it's really given us pause. We're really doing our homework and digging in to say, you know, we want to give our students the right information and for them to feel equipped to be in the classroom. And I think what shook me to the core, and I shared this with the team, was when I had a student say to me, if not our classrooms, you know, to provide the place for healthy mutual respect to have discourse, where are our students going to learn it? Where are they going to have a safe place to practice it, if not in our classrooms? And that's a question I still can't answer for them.
Well, and then it puts those kids at risk too. So kids who are experiencing these differences, are we not allowed to discuss it with them if they bring it up, if they have
Ask the
parents?
question.
You know, suddenly we have to tell them we can't discuss it with them. I mean, that's problematic for the kids. It's very discriminatory because now we can't talk to your parent, you talk about you because you have a transgender parent or because you have two parents of the same sex. So at that point, it really is going to set back public education in a way that I don't think people are considering.
Well, the way the administration treated Clover, then you begin to think about at-risk youth in that school system who can't talk to anybody. They have no one that represents them in the classroom. You know, as a teacher, that breaks my heart, you know, and having worked with teachers who were either in the closet or a parent complained because, you know, and what I found was my middle school could cared less. It didn't make any difference, but parents were concerned that it was disruptive to their child. And I just think number one, you've obviously never stepped in my classroom, but, that's where it's so hard to combat, because it's the administration just pushes it off as a parent complained or a parent has concerns. And that's where, you have to fight it, that, now some of those bills that are giving the parents the right to say, you can teach my child this, but not this, and you have to do, that is going to become just a goat rope that, I don't think that, obviously, legislators have no idea what a classroom is like, so, but, it really, it does concern me just in such a hurtful way.
With increased suicide rates.
Oh, absolutely, that's documented. It's
Well, and a lot
documented.
of times what I hear, because I'm elementary, I hear a lot of, well, that doesn't happen in the elementary world. But I had identifying students, and I had students changing their pronouns, and I had students that were found that they were cutting themselves because of these issues. So it does happen in the elementary world. And there are students as young as, first and second graders that identify as trans. So it does. It's definitely worthy of, having conversations.
It's very difficult to negotiate, because you all have been in my children's literature class. And the one thing I always say about your literature selections is every child
Should be represented.
deserves to see themselves in a book. But with House Bill 1084,
They don't get that.
that becomes a major issue. And I didn't really think about it until I just graded the bibliographies. And there's some amazing literature and activities that students wrote in those assignments. And immediately I thought, oh my goodness. I guess we've not talked as programs, where are we teaching this 1084 to make sure our students don't find themselves in legal trouble. Because if you go out and you put this in your room right now, you're in major trouble. But at the same time, I wholeheartedly believe every child deserves to see themselves in the literature that's in that classroom. And so that is a very interesting place to be, trying to negotiate in terms of making sure teacher candidates know what the law is, and so they are protected or not. But at the same time, how do you take care of your kids?
Yeah, it's certainly gonna advance the privileged.
Well, in my early lit class, I brought in books that would be controversial under this bill, and Alicia, you probably saw some of those. Make sure these are on your shelves,
Yeah.
So.
And in Florida, the House bill in Florida, they absolutely could not be on the shelf.
No, and the media, it all sits on the media.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends who are media specialists.
Yeah.
They're like, we're the ones who will lose our jobs, because we were the ones who had to go into the classrooms, say, take that off, take that off, take that off. A teacher cannot buy a book anymore and bring it to their classroom. Everything has to go through the media specialist. And so the media specialist is the last one. And for some folks, that's highly troubling.
It says one unfortunate piece is the most teachers don't even know what the LGBTQ plus acronym means, which places them at a disadvantage to understand their students at the most basic level. And then we have, I may have missed this somewhere, but this is really,
Is it already
this is
published?
already published, yeah.
The bill is research.
I think your research.
No, it's,
Not yet.
No, it's in process.
it's.
Yeah,
process.
okay,
It's out for
AJ
review.
says not yet, and imagine the you guys. There would be just one piece of understanding. Okay, okay, we got through all the reading.
Ray, did you have a question?
So I know that the not being able to have those books is in Florida. Are there laws in place yet in Georgia that does that yet, or is
And
it?
Florida, the vice-
And to be clear too, and you'll find this in education, you'll find this in education, for example, when accountability measures had to come out, you'll find states like California, Texas, New York a lot of times are the forerunners, and then you'll find states kind of follow those when you get out into the to the field, and CCRPI scores are everywhere, those accountability pieces. You'll see lots of the same pieces. Same thing here with the bills. The House bill in Florida, far more reaching, far more declarative in saying grade levels K through 3, you may not talk about, there can be no instruction about these particular topics. Well, of course, the K through 3 teachers said it's nowhere in our standards to, that's not what we teach. So really what the bill was saying is you can't have a conversation about it. Should a student ask a question, or should you have a book on your shelf? Which you could no longer do that, because then it would lead to, you're then teaching, families, that.
But Georgia uses the word divisive.
Georgia only uses the
But that's
word.
pretty subjective.
It is
You know,
very.
so, and I have the right to say, I see offense with this, and there's gonna be a place where I can make that complaint. So, while Florida's as far reaching, Florida draws a line,
At where it is.
whereas Georgia,
Divisive.
you don't know who's gonna say, well, wait, you said this.
So then you're just walking quietly and just like,
Yeah.
I had to get special permission to bring books into my child's classroom about adoption, because they thought it might get too much into the where babies come from. And it's like, but it was okay for all the kids to walk up and say, why is your mom white? Because they're African American. And so, it was really, but in the end, they did allow it, and they were age appropriate books about adoption. I wasn't going to give the here's where babies come from to, first graders, but the educating on the side of adoption was really important for my girls to kind of have people understand in a positive way, instead of, those kinds of things. But I was really surprised that, I had to get permission to come in and just share a lesson on adoption. So.
Yeah, the other thing about Florida's House bill that there's a lot of things about the House bills, but one thing is disclosure to the parent or guardian, that the bill is very specific in that parents have the right to know what's happening in when their child is in a public setting, in a public school, right? So it's very far reaching and much more specific in saying, the school has to report anything that happens or is just at the school. So one of the things I thought about was, what if a child goes to a counselor or teacher, which oftentimes they do, to report abuse at home, or abuse maybe even outside of the home? Where does that child's protection and privacy, because under that bill now, that has to be disclosed. So again, all kinds of issues about, the intention, and most of the time, it's not uncommon for a child, a student, a minor, to choose a teacher or a school counselor to talk about, where's their privacy, where's their protection, especially if it has to do with, so lots of things, and that's another reason why we're so protective of our candidates, because they do hear a lot of noise about why would you want to be a teacher, and so we feel a real personal obligation to help our candidates know that if this is what you want to do, we're here to equip you. And that's why I think some of us are so unsettled about, we want to make sure we know what we're doing to support them in the very best way and prepare them in the very best way for the classroom of the 21st century and beyond.
Well, that's an excellent question. I'm going to throw it out to you guys. So given all this, why do you want to go into teaching?
I, for one, I'm a little bit older than most of the people in my cohort, at least in our PS3 together. I've traveled across the country and outside of the country a little bit. I've had previous careers. I won't lie that a big part of it is that I'm invested in having a stable job where I can have a schedule, where I can invest in other parts of my community. I'm also a military spouse. I have over 10 little kids that I help take care of just from that part of my community, and I just want to be able to be there for those people. And I've always just loved working with children, and I do like advocating for people. For the last 10 years of my life, I've had a lot of fight in me to kind of put my nose in areas, and Dr. Radcliffe is very familiar with that. For me, there is room for change, and we need to stop going backwards. And I find a lot of enjoyment in able to put myself in a position where there are people that need things. I was a kid that definitely needed things. I'm one of 15 kids. I didn't have teachers that I could go to for a long time, and even though when I eventually developed those relationships, I never chose to disclose what my life was like, but they just were great, a great place to be. So even if I never reach that area with kids where they want to be the person who can come with me, I know that I can at least make a safe environment. So.
Okay, there you go.
I have a little bit of like a different end goal, I guess, because I want to be, I want to work in library sciences. I want to either be like a children's librarian or work within like a museum, a non-traditional setting, or like within a school library. Because I love working with kids and I can see myself teaching, but but yeah, and so I love working with students, but I want to take more of that kind of track towards helping on a more like service-based level, because I like working with students, but I also know that there's only so much you can do within the classroom. And I feel like there's pros and cons to working like within a library. You can provide sometimes more services, sometimes less, but I kind of want to go down that track and provide services to a larger community, especially with books and getting students books.
I think this way, you'll only have 5 books that you have to deal with.
Exactly.
By the time you graduate,
My job's gonna be.
library.
I don't know, not with the advocate sitting to her left. I think,
So work together.
that's right.
Yeah.
Your turn.
Oh, my turn. I don't know. Like even with all the news and stuff and all the stuff going on, it's still what I want to do, and I don't think that many things could persuade me, but I'm already seeing where I would end up breaking. Does that make sense? Like where I would break to the pressure, because there is so much pressure. So just taking it one day at a time right now.
Yeah, well, I think that's great. I'm glad you're doing it because we certainly need good teachers. But yeah, it's going to be a big responsibility as far as how you balance that. How you talk to kids without actually letting them know what you're saying. Yeah.
Drawing parallels.
All in code, yeah.
You know, because you all know my godson is a little black boy. And
somebody
in
comes
Florida,
to
you can't-
activity in the classroom with
you cannot-
challenge or two
you gotta
kids,
make sure that
and that opens a
white
conversation because
doesn't look like
kids
they ever
will
know that.
same thing as mine, why is your mom white?
And so
You know,
Zach
and
was
says, why do you have two
asking
moms?
his mom to
Why
go to
can't
bed.
you talk about, you know,
Yeah,
some of it's
like
like
his treatment on. And he said, well, who's Frederick Douglass? She said, well, he's an abolitionist. And he was, and she said, well, what's an abolitionist? And they abolished. And she was, but it was bedtime. I didn't have time to really have this conversation. And I looked at her and said, if you don't have that conversation, who's going to teach him? And she's like, you know, you're right, because down in Florida, that conversation is not going to be had.
That's insane.
And then she goes, well, I guess if I were a teacher, I would have to teach the caste system from another country and try to help my students make that transfer without me, you know, all inferences to bring it over. But that's really where it's going to be for a while until people fight it enough to be able to make another
Go
change.
back to the banned books.
So, yeah.
I do quickly want to share one other experience where one of our science methods teachers came to talk to us. When you have a great day in the field, you can't wait to rush back to the office and share what great experiences the student teachers are having. And this professor was so excited. It was a science lesson, and these two candidates crushed it, did a great job. But while they were working in small groups, this was an 8th grade science class, and it was a genetics unit. And they're working in small groups, and they're doing, great work. And the two candidates are facilitating the lesson. And a young man kind of had an aha moment. A light bulb went off as they were working, and he looked up and he said, "Abortion is an economic issue."
Oops.
And the two student teachers froze for a second, but handled it beautifully. And immediately our colleague said, "Well, that's a divisive topic." But the fact that the student, in his own way, not knowing where he came from or what he's taught at home or anything like that, but looking at population and things, and just out it came. But the two candidates really beautifully never used the term abortion in the answer, redirected, and those are some of the teachings. But that was another, because had the child gone home or other children in the room had gone home and said, "Miss So-and-so said abortion, blah, blah, blah," then there you are on the path of what was mentioned in the class. Are you teaching something that I don't teach at home that's counter to what I teach at home? So that was just another example of, a student had an aha moment for them, but it was not explored. It was sort of left on the shelf there.
It's kind of funny because I teach religious studies as well as philosophy. And years ago at another institution, we were talking about cults. And the definition of a cult is so specific. But cults aren't necessarily bad. And a student brought up one of the local churches, and we went by the standards and said, yes, it does fit the standards. However, so does the Catholic Church. So, many of the other churches, we talked about that. Next thing I know, I'm getting a call from the university lawyer, saying, "What did you say in class?" I said, "I didn't say anything." The student brought it up, and
and they went through the process.
Yeah, but we had freedom at that point. Yeah, it's going to be a tricky thing for a lot of teachers to know how to respond to those situations, and some people are just better at that than others.
It's gonna be a lot of responsibility on the EPP.
Yeah.
And for parenting teachers.
Well, and one of the first things that we teach our candidates is that relationships come first. You can't teach a child until you have a relationship with that child. And if you're leaving these children out because you're not building a relationship with them because they have two moms, or because they identify as trans, or whatever, and you're not meeting that child where they are holistically, then you're not ever getting to the point of building that relationship. And everything we've taught them is, if you don't have a relationship, you cannot teach. So if you cannot build that relationship with that kid, you can throw content out the window. So it's problematic where we're sitting right now.
Legally, this just all sounds very familiar.
Yeah, history repeating itself. And the last thing we learned when we went to Florida is that if a student wanted to go by another name or had a pronoun preference, it had to have parental consent. And so even, we're used to, students maybe wanting to be called by a nickname or a middle name or something, even that, but we know the reasoning behind that. So now this principal said, when you go through the roll at the beginning of the year, what would you like to be called? That has to have parental consent.
Even for just a nickname?
Anything. If you want the student referred to anything other than what's on your roster, when you receive your roster, when you guys know when you call out names, right? That's
Mine would have been a hot mess that season.
I would have totally, had that law been in place back when I was teaching, I would have completely been in violation, and I would have had a parent angry because I thought 8th grade boy wanted to be called Greg. Called him Greg. They had a parent conference, and we were like saying Greg, and the mother interrupted and said, "Excuse me, I named my son Sir Gregory. You will refer to him as Sir Gregory." And so in that conference, we referred to Sir Gregory, but as soon as we went back to the classroom, we called him Greg. We definitely had trouble. That law in place now.
The parent, you have to seek parental. So if the student says to you, when you look at that roster, and if it's anything other than the legal name, yeah.
This is why I would be so fired, Kate.
There's some schools too where it's if your student wants to, like, is transgender and wants to go by different pronouns and different names, you have to have like doctor's notes, you have to have like a psychiatrist appointment, you have to have all of this like medical proof that they have to justify their identity in the classroom. And I don't know what
There's
that
so
is.
much wrong with that.
It's so like, why do you have to prove that's who you are? It's
Well,
just who you are.
It just turns it into a medical issue.
That.
You know, that's, yeah.
Because you have to be diagnosed.
Yeah.
And of course, that
can write them out.
Hey, that goes back to, you know, bathroom use, changing for PE, you know, all of those kinds of things, too. And, so, and, you know, if and when it ever came up too in a particular school, because we had been in the school of the bathroom issue, all the faculty bathrooms were individual bathrooms, you know, so it's like, hey, it's not a reason not to take the candidate. We've been in your school. They're all private, you know, individual. But it's amazing how.
And you always just use whichever one's open, because you only got 3 minutes between.
And there's only
It
one
doesn't
of
matter, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, you know, you just go.
There's like 3 of them, you know who they are.
They would not survive in Europe, where you walk past the urinals, the guys are going to go to the stalls. I mean, they're off that was 20 years ago when we were in the Netherlands, and it was like, they didn't care. It's like, everybody's doing their business.
I would love to see that, and it'll be interesting to see the architectural design of schools, because we've seen that, you know, post-school shootings now with how, you know, the protective glass and how the rooms, you know, unfortunately, where storage units will also fit 25 7-year-olds, and have the design elements. But I'd love to see the bathrooms, you know, in Europe, you're exactly right, where they're all individual stalls and everyone comes out to wash their hands.
Yeah.
Once you're in the stall, you're in the stall.
Yeah.
So lots of implications there, the design of schools and those kinds of things.
Well, and I think, aren't they doing that in the renovation of our dormitories here, where they're taking them from like gang showers to individual.
Yes,
Individual.
they did that in Brown.
Well, all 3 of them eventually, I think, are gonna have that update, but the one I know is finished, where they've got, now instead they have individual stalls with doors
And
for the
there's a
showers.
shower
and
and a toilet and a sink, and
Right.
the whole door closes.
Right, so you have.
Before, it was like just an open room.
Yeah, no, it's a shower.
Yeah, no,
I
it's
never
open,
did.
so it's
I
not
never
even,
saw the
it's not
outside.
even like
City, we
Reed.
had a
So
stall.
Reed has like, it's curtains, which is, but it has a little, so in Reed Hall, it's, curtains, and so you've got like tile dividers, but it's curtains, but in places like Brown and Langdale, it's like just a it's all one tile with a bunch of different like drains and, you know, shower heads, and then just curtain and like flimsy plastic little divider, and that's how the showers were in Brown, and they're still like that in Langdale, but they're gonna start,
All 3 of them are
renovations.
supposed to be.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you just,
Wow.
you're taking a shower and you're looking
The new
around,
ones-
like,
So the new ones are private for bathroom and shower, yeah, it's all one little
completely sealed
box.
off, you get your own little,
Sort of cool.
can wash your hands, do your business.
But it's still separate from like.
Well, I hate to call this to.
Right,
But
right.
it's still
Yeah,
kind
right.
of traditional.
But we're gonna have to stop the recording and let everybody go, because it's 1 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. This is a very important discussion.
Thank you.
Boy, diet last night.
We're-
said,
we're
"Oh,
allowed
free
to
up
push
all the bathrooms in
We're pushing buttons.
Gonna push all the buttons.
Here.